Where do artists find inspiration? There are as many answers to that question as there are artists. The Dutch-born Jan Hendrix, classically trained as a printmaker and graphic artist, is fascinated by nature. Not just the beauty of nature, but how drastically that landscape has changed under the hand of humans. Based in Mexico City since 1978, Hendrix travels the world pursuing the experiences, cultures, and training that have influenced his work. His infinitely complex patterns are featured in books, paintings, etchings, and architectural metal installations that have a sense of life and dynamism to them. Just like their botanical sources of inspiration, they mesmerize even the most casual observer. Welcome to Art Bites, a podcast from the Nelson-Atkins Museum of Art, where we take you beyond the art on the walls and into the stories of the artists and the ideas behind them. I'm your host, Kathleen Layton. Jan Hendrix, thank you so much for joining us.
It's a pleasure, Kathleen.
Let's go back a few years. You were born on a farm in Holland.
Yes.
And I can't imagine there were many museums in that area.
There was. It was very rural, and it was very much a farming area. Although there was one museum that I mention in my in interviews about my life there in this very small place, and it was a museum that was founded by missionaries who would bring in some of them would bring in the most amazing collections of, for instance, the scarabees or butterflies, or there was a room. I remember there was a room with the clothes of the missionaries that were murdered in China in the 19th century, and it was one of those strange, eclectic, tiny, weird museums. Stuffed animals. There was a stuffed bear that we were very much taken by. Mm-hmm. An excursion to that museum for me was like an excursion into the real world, because I thought my village was definitely something I had to escape from. Mm-hmm. And the best way to get into the real world would be to get through one of those museum rooms and step into the real world. You know what I mean? It's like I wanted to get away from that farm. I wanted to get away from that village, and I wanted to get into the city.
And so stories are the way to transport us there. And looking at those objects brought you into those stories.
It's like all those stuffed animals, they took me as their friend, and they said, we're going to get... It's a bit like... It's almost like Alice in Wonderland sort of sensation.
Going down the rabbit hole.
Yeah, I think the rabbit hole, that museum was the rabbit hole. So there was a museum very much when I started out.
So you were searching for something all along here. What were you searching for? Did you know at that time or not? You just knew that you didn't want to stay at that farm?
One thing I knew for sure, that I wanted to get out of there. And second, I wanted to get as a profession as far away of any profession that was professed in my family. So I said, well, there hasn't been any artist in the family. There has been a doctor, and there has been a bishop, and there has been all sorts of professions.
Well, and you probably didn't even know any artists in your community.
No, there was no artist. Art was not part of the language of that place. And I think by sheer deduction, I thought that would be the best profession that would get me into the biggest cities in the world. That would get me out of the place. That would be my passport down the rabbit hole into something else.
So
and then I started to get, obviously, when you become an adolescent, you start to go into, well, it depends, obviously, but I went very quickly into, what was it? First record I got was John Lee Hooker, and the second one was Blonde on Blonde by Bob Dylan, and all of that became Jack Kerouac, and then the books, and Ginsberg, and the beat, generation became very important. And I think all of that created a nice confusion that confused me, but confused everybody else as well. And probably was, again, my luggage to get out of there.
And that confusion felt comfortable for you. It must have, or you would not have kept searching it out.
I think it's a method that if you add up, create a certain personal chaos, it can be very helpful. But I think our way of working, and I think as an artist still now, it has never been linear. It's way more a puzzle that you are putting together, a puzzle that you are putting the different ideas of your work. You put that in place gradually during your whole life.
So art is sort of a puzzle you're trying to find the answer to. You're trying to solve it.
You're trying to solve it. You will never solve it. You know you're never going to solve it, but at least you have a method. That's your method.
Well, you started by printing for other artists,
Yeah.
but then you began to print for yourself.
Yeah.
How did that transition happen?
That happened as a young artist. Obviously, nobody was asking for my work or interested. So I arrived in Mexico with a challenge to make a living. And since I turned out to be quite a good printer, actually, I turned out to be a really good printer, silkscreen printer, a little bit of etching and lithography as well. I saw that there was a lack of print shops, and I set up a tiny print shop, started to work for mainly Mexican artists, became quite known and became quite notorious of doing my work well. And I got the whole lexicon of established artists in my studio, all way older than I was. And I got along with quite a few of them, and I made some really good friendships there. And also, I saw them at work, all of them. They were coming into the workshop, and they had to stay there for the day to do a drawing or to prepare something. And actually, I learned, on one side, I learned a lot from them. And on the other side, I learned what I should never do.
That's the best education you can ask for.
Great education. It's way better to know what you should not do than to know think that you think you know what you should do. So the whole thing turned into another academy for me, a print academy, a graphic high-level print academy, and I really then I started to get more attention for I kept on doing my own prints always, but in reduced time because I was dedicating more time to working for the other artists. And then I realized that it was time to jump into the deep and say, okay, now I'm going to do my own work, and that's it. And I still printed for a few people, but very much out of friendship, but that was it.
Was it thrilling to do that, or was it really scary?
What?
Jumping in and just doing your own thing.
You think jumping in the deep is easy?
No.
You remember when you did that for the first time in the pool?
I do. Okay. I do. It was thrilling, though, and that's why I wanted to do it.
But I don't know if I liked it or not, but I had to do it. Also, you start to get into I did that for 10 years, printing for others, and you get into a routine that maybe you want to get out of.
And when did nature capture your fancy as an inspiration for your art?
That was always there one way or the other. So that was always a theme, but very much at the beginning, it was still very much the representation of landscape and very much the conceptual study of what landscape is about and what nature is about. So it was always the question mark there. What is this? What is this thing, landscape painting? And so I started to look at and study the end of the 19th century landscape painting. That actually you have great examples here in the States. You have the most amazing landscape painters from the 19th century. So I was very much taken by that, and there was probably a certain Romanticism that was influenced by people like Caspar Friedrich, by the Dutch landscape painters from the 17th century, Ruysdael, up to Vermeer. I mean, landscape painting is tricky to say what is landscape painting, because if you look at a 14th century medieval Flemish painting, you'll see a saint up front, and you see or God, Jesus, or some biblical scene. But there's a tiny window at the back, and through that window you see a Flemish landscape. And it's probably only 5% of the whole painting. But that tiny landscape is the beginning of landscape painting and still goes on until now. So I feel very much part of a whole line that keeps on studying in different ways the same subject.
And you travel around the world taking photographs that you use in your work.
Yep.
How does that work?
Well, photography is... I started out as a filmmaker and a photographer. And I very much gave up on both. Filmmaking because it was too much of a financial circus. Photography was too much of a lonely profession.
It's very singular.
It's very singular. But photography has that peculiar... It's one eye as well. It's not two eyes, it's one eye. There's that thing, I don't know. I loved it, but I couldn't deal with it. And then I went into printmaking because of that. Because printmaking has a nice mix of collaborations, of collective work, of understanding and teaching and understanding and exploring and researching. So.
And you took an entire month to be in isolation so that you could prepare for your year ahead. And that's something that you did years ago. Is that something you still do regularly? Is that helpful for you to just disconnect?
I need it again, but I haven't done it for years now. I think COVID sort of cut it off. Before COVID, I would go away and stay away. I would go to France, or I would go somewhere, and I would just stay quiet and with a stack of books and walk.
You have said that artists need to be stubborn. What do you mean by that?
Well, what if you're not? I think if you're not, you won't make it. You have to sort of push yourself through the things that you encounter, but also you have to. I think you have to be extremely stubborn. You have to believe in it, in what you're doing. You have to not to be worried about any setback. You have to just go on.
You have to be your own advocate.
Sorry?
You have to be your own advocate.
Yeah. You have to develop your own language, and then you can be maybe a bit less stubborn. But since you learned how to be stubborn, you're going to keep on being stubborn.
It's a good lesson to learn, right? Now, you use pen, ink, paper, metal. You use all sorts of different materials. Your scale is from tiny to monumental, so you're kind of all over the map with that. How did that evolve to be your practice, that you could just choose your material like that?
Do you remember there was a period of that was all over the world. There was a craze, not really, but about the word multiple like in editions, and there were lots of artists and lots of print shops in printmaking. They were exploring monumental scales. You remember the big paperworks that Hockney would make with Gemini, with Tyler. There were the great workshops in the 70s and the 80s would create the most amazing works. Frank Stella, you name them. Robert Rauschenberg is a great example. And they would create works that would be complex. They would go away from the print on a small sheet of paper. They would add more sheets of paper together, and then therefore they would create an enormous monumental piece made out of different sheets of paper. Then somebody like Rauschenberg did the Rocky project, and he went to travel around the world and start to work with ceramics in China, and they were always thinking about how to reproduce this, how to make this mechanical, so we can make it in an edition of 5 copies or 6 copies or 20 copies. So there was this sort of, it was in the age of it was a certain hunger for how to create works on a different scale, and it didn't matter how you made it, if it was made out of paper or steel or whatever material. So I think I was brought up in that atmosphere as a printmaker. And I think that influenced me very much into always do not worry about the material, worry about what you're going to tell, worry about what you're going to tell with that material. So you can use it all. You can use textile, you can use anything, glass, but do know what you're going to do with it. Try to figure out why you want to use that and how.
And how do you figure that out? You take these photographs all around the world, and then you're looking at something. How do you know this is going to be fashioned out of metal? This is going to be drawn on paper.
Well, that depends on the scale it's going to be. That depends on, so first I have to figure out what scale I'm going to use. Then I have to figure out what material goes with that scale. Then I have to figure out if I want to have it inside or outside. Then I have to figure out if it has to be framed or not. So then you get all the other considerations. But at the beginning, you have just a simple, maybe a drawing or a photograph or both. And that sort of gives you the information, which is very simple and very, very little. And out of that, then you have to have your mindset to understand what you want to do. That takes some time before you know if it's going to stay small, it's going to be bigger. I have a process of work that sometimes the process, apart from taking away longer, the process becomes the work itself, which is scary. It's a bit, you want to get to a result, but sometimes you get stuck in the middle. It's like you work on a manuscript of a book for such a long time, you never get to the publisher.
Is the process the place that you find your passion, or is that frustrating for you to go through a long process before you even start to create a piece of art?
Yeah, that's a good one. That's a good question. The process is fascinating and therefore very frustrating because it can end up with no final product. It can end up with nothing finished.
Do you have
because I get into it. So, like, say I have a project that deals with botany in the desert, just to give you an example. And then I start to investigate and research that botany, and then the research of that botany becomes, so fascinated that I just get stuck in the desert with my botany, with my plants, and I don't get to a final conclusion. And then sometimes there's a push from somewhere, or there's a show coming up, or there's something happening that suddenly I say, well, I should finish that. This is great. I just finished a glass project based on drawings I did during COVID. And we're years later, and now finally I'm getting the first finished work that has to do with the use of those drawings. And now I finally found one first step to show them.
So it takes a long time.
It takes a long time with the risk that you pile it up next to the other piles.
You must have piles all over.
Yeah, there's too many.
What is it that you want to communicate with your art? I know that the state of the world and the state of the environment is of concern to you. Yeah. Is that your major message, would you say, to people through your art? Or does the message change with every piece you create?
No, I think I always want to emphasize the the need for us to be careful. I think all of us do agree by now that we have to do something urgently and drastically. I don't feel that there's no doubt about what's going on. If my work helps to understand the urgency, I'm fine, but I don't make it because I want to get that message across. It's just that it is so that the work itself does put the message across. It's something that I've noticed. People see the work and then they start to think about their garden or their nature or their situation or their worries.
Do you have a favorite piece you've created that was hard to let go?
Quite a few, but never hard to let go. I think you make the work for somebody else. You don't make it for yourself. You make it so somebody else can look at it. That's what in the times of COVID, I felt that one of the bad feelings about that period was very much that you couldn't do a show, you couldn't show your work, you couldn't go to a museum. I remember the first time I went back to a museum was after COVID. Was like that was a relief to walk into a museum space and see a really good painting, a really good work of art.
After COVID, we had some people come into the Nelson-Atkins that were so starved for a museum. They were dancing as they walked in. Yeah. They were so happy.
And then you realize how important the arts are. Mm-hmm. The arts are essential for our well-being and are very important for our peace of mind.
Where do you see your practice heading now?
No, the same chaos is going to continue.
It's always chaotic.
Going to be nicely a mixed salad.
You've always wanted to design a postage stamp.
Yeah, but I'm too late now. I think by the time I have a chance to do it, the postal office is closing.
I think that window has passed.
So maybe it's going to be the last postal stamp.
Maybe. Well, that's something to aspire to, right? Jan Hendrix, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today. You've been listening to Art Bites, a podcast from the Nelson-Atkins Museum of Art. I'm Kathleen Layton. We'll see you next time.